Visit patreon.com/consensusunreality for exclusive episodes and content.
Alright, welcome to episode 24 of Consensus Unreality. We are joined today by countercultural and Discordian chronicler Adam Gorightly. He is the author of many books in the larger conspiracy paranormal sphere, including classics like the Manson-focused book Shadow over Santa Susana and the Carrie Thornley Prankster and the Conspiracy, and most recently Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks, about which we will be talking mostly in this episode. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on, Adam.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So, I thought a fun question to start us off might be, who do you think are the top three ufological hoaxers?
Oh my gosh. There's so many.
Yeah.
The Mount Rushmore of UFO hoaxers?
Right, yeah.
Well, among my favorites are Jim Moseley and Gray Barker.
Yeah.
And the famous Straith letter hoax. This is, going back in the early 1950s when they sent a hoax letter to George Adamski, telling George he was on the right track. And we've been watching your research, talking to the communicating with the aliens, and if you're ever in D.C., pay us a visit. Apparently, according to how the story goes, either Moseley or Barker got a hold of some absconded State Department stationery and used that to hoax their letter.
Yeah.
And it's very Discordian type of ufological hoax. So that's a famous one. That's two. Let's see.
Yeah.
Richard Doty, maybe he could. He's quite the considered a hoaxer by some. So he's up there in the echelon or the annals of great hoaxers, I would think. There's so many.
Yeah. Yeah, there sure are. Doty, I think, is kind of a character that pops up throughout the whole book, and I mean, I kind of grew up with on the forums and stuff, kind of following this stuff, starting around with like the exchange program stuff, the Serpo stuff, and so just seeing Doty like pop up every once in a while as like this this appeal to authority, sort of like an ex-intelligence person, and he's just like been messing with people for like 40 years. Well,
the Serpo is kind of a retread of what he was involved with many years before that. This whole story about an exchange program with the ETs, that goes way back to the late 70s, 80s, and it seemed that Doty's was, really one of the people who's been promoting that over the years.
Right. And there's that documentary Mirage Man, which kind of gave him like a star treatment too, which I think that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, is he still, pulling the same tricks? Is he still out there doing that?
Well, he's still out there. He just did an interview with Jimmy Church. I didn't hear that one, but he's still active doing whatever exactly he is doing. It's never quite
right
clear with that guy.
Yeah. So he was part of that whole aviary scene. And for our listeners who might not be familiar, what was the aviary?
So, this goes back, oh boy, kind of started in the 70s, mid 70s or so. And it was basically an ad hoc group, as the story goes, at least, of different military intelligence people and also some people in the private sector, and writers like Bill Moore interacted with this group, the aviary. John Alexander, you might know his name, and as well as Doty and Hal Puthoff, all these characters that pop up time and again. Hal Puthoff recently was involved with the whole TTSA thing, but they were basically, as the story goes, this kind of ad hoc group that had an interest in UFOs, also psychic phenomena with these government intelligence connections. And they were looking at, pushing UFO disclosure forward, of getting the truth out there. Supposedly, another way of looking at it is that it was basically some type of psychological operation that they were involved with, or spreading disinformation, or maybe multiple agendas that different people who were involved in the aviary were involved with.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into that whole Dulce mythos too. What's that about? That's like the underground base stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. So you want?
Yeah. What do we have going on there?
Oh boy. Well, that's kind of the main focus of, or one of the main focuses of the book that led me to write this thing. It really started with a guy named Tal Levesque, who I met over 10 years ago or so. Tal had been involved in ufology and also hollow earth investigator, inner earth investigator. Been part of that scene. He and his wife, Mary Martin, put out a zine way back in the day in the 70s called The Hollow Earth Hassle. Mm-hmm. And like I said, about 10, 12 years ago, I came in contact with Tal. I really didn't know who he was up until that point, but then we began interacting. And as I learned more about this guy, I saw that he'd had his hands in all kinds of stuff over the years. And as time passed, I became more aware of his involvement in the Dulce base story, basically he was propagating that mythos and was one of the, could say, originators or creators of the myth. But where it all started was with Paul Benowitz in the late 70s, or 79, 80. Mm-hmm. And Benowitz, in a nutshell, and he's covered, you mentioned Mirage Man, the documentary, and there's also the Mirage Man book, and also my friend Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, got into that era, and the interactions of Paul Benowitz and with Richard Doty and Bill Moore. And in a nutshell, Benowitz was a contractor for the government. He worked in aviation, developing sensors for airplanes and aircraft and whatnot, and different instrumentation. And he lived right on the outskirts of Kirtland Air Force Base. And in 79 or so, he began seeing UFOs over the base and became quite alarmed. And they were hovering over what's called the Monsanto weapons area, which at that time was the largest storehouse for nuclear weapons. And so he began filming these things, and also really set up this sophisticated array of listening devices, started picking up signals. As time passed, he began to believe or suspect that these were ET UFOs he was filming and photographing, and the signals that he was picking up were coming from these ET ships. And so he contacted the Kirtland Air Base security, the Air Force, and that brought him up on the radar of their intelligence folks, one of whom was Richard Doty. Began interacting with Benowitz. Doty was with AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. And it really became part of a counterintelligence program that Doty was involved with, because they were trying to figure out what exactly Benowitz was capturing with his photography and motion pictures and these signals he was picking up, because what he was picking up, according to, sources involved with this, was really some secret testing of stealth technology, and also kind of this laser radar program that was communicating with satellites. Those were the communications he was picking up, and they became concerned that he would pass this information, once he figured out exactly what it is, to the Russians or other foreign nationals. And so, according to some accounts, thus began a disinformation campaign, which is famous in UFO lore, and they began feeding him Benowitz disinformation. And part of the disinformation was that there was an alien underground base at Dulce, which was a ways away from Kirtland. They were trying to distract him from Kirtland base and point him towards Dulce, where there was indeed a lot of weird shit going on during that period with UFO sightings and cattle mutilation. So that began the basically the Dulce base story, and it gets even deeper from there.
Yeah, it kind of spirals off into this whole fantasy world. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, yeah.
One of the interesting things, and Greg Bishop wrote about this in his book, was that according to Bill Moore, and Bill Moore was right in the middle of all this. He's kind of an infamous character. In 1980, he wrote the book Incident at Roswell, or the Roswell Incident, and that kind of launched, the whole Roswell story back into popular consciousness. And according to a story Moore, who is friends with Greg Bishop, Bill Moore told my friend Bishop, and I guess a little background, Moore, let's back up just a little bit. Moore, after he wrote his book Incident at Roswell, he came on the radar of these intelligence agency folks with the Air Force, and was approached by someone going by the code name of Falcon. And a kind of deal was struck between the two of them, Falcon and Moore, that Moore would share top secret UFO poop if Moore would help them infiltrate the UFO community and keep track on all these, different people like Benowitz and other folks in ufology to see who they were talking with. At that time, a lot of the people in ufology were also government contractors involved in stealth technology and these type of things. So there was part of it was a concern on who these guys are interacting with. Are they leaking any information about stealth technology or anything? So that's how Bill Moore got involved in this. And he began feeding information to Benowitz from Doty, and some of this was disinformation, more of the ET type stuff. And so at one point, according to Bishop's research, J. Allen Hynek, we all know who he is, I think. He was doing contract work for the government at that time, and he passed on a computer to Benowitz that had a software program in it that would allow Benowitz to communicate with the aliens, which is kind of an eyebrow raiser. What was going on here? And basically what some of the information he started getting through this computer, there was images of aliens and these type of things, but also he was actually talking directly to ETs, or so he thought, who were giving him this information about Dulce Base. And one of the first memos concerning Dulce Base was around 82 or 3. Benowitz, after interacting with the Kirtland Air Force Base security, didn't feel they were taking him seriously, so he started contacting different politicians, and one of them was Senator Pete Domenici. This was in New Mexico. He also contacted, sent letters to Ronald Reagan and other people, but there's one letter he sent to Domenici where it's one of the earliest references of the Dulce Base, and he mentioned there was an underground base there, and that there had been some type of confrontation in 1979 between the humans at the base and the ETs. This was like the exchange program you mentioned before, and supposedly what was going on there, they were the ETs were exchanging secret technology in exchange for humans upon whom they could experiment. So that's, as far as I can tell, that's really where the Dulce Base mythos first started, or where it was first mentioned.
Right, yeah.
Reminds me a lot of the Skinwalker Ranch story as well, this sort of like style of cloaking. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's all tied into this larger story, because a lot of the same players that were involved with all of these folks, the aviary was interacting with Doty and Bill Moore and this group of researchers, and a lot of those same characters later ended up in Skywalker Ranch. What's his name? Bob Bigelow and Hal Puthoff, and so it's the same characters that pop up time and again. I mean, who knows what's going on at Skinwalker Ranch for sure. I have different theories. It could be a facility that's set up to, take some people out there and kind of stage some stuff to blow people's minds, and more psyops, disinformation type stuff going on out there.
Right. Yeah, that would make sense given the history of these kinds of locations. It seems like there's always some kind of spooky business going on with psyops.
And well, just to a little bit more on the Dulce thing. So you had that early letter from Benowitz, and he started going out there and investigating the Dulce area, and he believed after a while that there was a secret underground base there. And in May of 1980, one of the things that led him to believe this was a lady named Myrna Hansen, who in May of 1980, she was driving through Eagle Nest, New Mexico, and this is kind of out there in the Dulce area, not far from Skinwalker Ranch, Colorado, New Mexico.
Yeah,
out in that area, and she had a sighting where she saw a UFO appeared, and a beam came down and sucked up a cow up into the ship. And then with a tractor beam, and then she and her son got sucked up into the craft, and they saw a ET dissecting a UFO on the craft. And she became obviously quite alarmed. After her experience, she contacted the local cops, and they got in touch with Gabe Valdez, who was a New Mexico State trooper. He's pretty well known for his research in cattle mutilations. Anyway, Valdez knew Benowitz, and he put Myrna Hansen in touch with Benowitz to help her figure out what the heck was going on. And Benowitz knew a hypnotic regression therapist named Leo Sprinkle, and they were involved in APRO, one of the early UFO organizations. Anyway, they started doing regressions of Myrna Hansen at Benowitz's home, and through those series of regressions, Hansen shared subsequent experiences she had where she was taken to an underground base, had the medical procedure and missing time, and an implant supposedly inserted at the base of her skull. And at one point she broke free of her captors and was running through the facility, and she saw the little hybrid babies and vats and that whole thing, that would later populate the X-Files. So this is, one of the places where a lot of these memes started. And because of all this, Benowitz began to suspect that her experience had happened at the Dulce underground base. And so a lot of this started to get out there, and UFO culture, conspiracy culture. Then in 1988, the Dulce papers surfaced, which really catapulted this whole thing into popular consciousness, and that's a big part of my book, looking at the whole story and kind of breaking it down. And originally, I was all started with an article I was writing called "Deconstructing Dulce" about 10 years ago. And as I got deeper into this, I saw how it connected with a lot of these other things we've been talking about: Bill Moore, the MJ-12 papers, the Aviary, Skywalker Ranch, later on Serpo, Richard Doty's involvement. You have the same characters that seem to pop up time and time again.
I think I mean, I always think of these things as kind of niche or something, fringe, I guess, but the images that come out of these memes, I guess, like you said, they end up in the X-Files, and they become like things that end up on t-shirts in like Target or something,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, even the term alien gray,
right,
that came from the Benowitz affair.
Yes.
In the early documentation, there's a report he authored called Project Beta, which was which he basically outlined how to deal with these dastardly aliens, and in that he referred to them as gray. So that was the early 80s, and of course the term became kind of more popular, used with the time Whitley Strieber rolled around. And so with the as I got more into this and the Dulce papers thing, that's where Tal Levesque came in. And as I get into the book, it was really Tal Levesque and John Lear that helped create and seed a lot of these stories about Dulce Base. And one of them was a security officer named Thomas Castello. That's kind of the big part of the story. Thomas Castello was the security officer at Dulce Base. Then he led a revolt along with the human security workers and some aliens that teamed up with them.
Yeah.
And when the smoke cleared, 66 of them were killed, and Costello was supposedly able to escape because he had this flash gun that would vaporize people that worked pretty well. So he was able to get out, and he took with him, once again, allegedly, photographs, security footage, basically to blow the whistle on what was going on at Dulce base. Thomas Costello never really existed, but
yeah,
he's part of the mythos, and later that story was kind of picked up on by a guy named Phil Schneider, who you might have heard of in the mid-90s, who was basically repeating that same story, that he had worked at Dulce base and had been part of this confrontation, and had he got pretty popular on the lecture circuit, Patriot UFO lecture circuit, and would show he was missing a couple of fingers and had some chest scars, which he would show off. But later, and this is seen, you can see this in some FOIA documents that got released in the last few years. Schneider was mentally unstable and was a self-mutilator. You know, that's the reason he lost his fingers.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, this meme about confrontation between humans and aliens at a base pops up time and time again. There's different variations on the story. Like there's an Area 51 version of this. It's, you know, one of those retreads that pops up in ufology time and again.
Yeah,
right.
I noticed a lot in the new book, like the Chapel Perilous effect of these characters who, as you mentioned with Benowitz, it just takes a gentle nudge into the abyss. And it's kind of just, it's interesting to examine the unintentional hoaxers of ufology, but then sort of the other angle that you've spoke about with your own Close Encounter, and the involvement of maybe people as a co-conspirator in Close Encounters. Where do you kind of fall on that now?
Rephrase that question.
Yeah, I think just listening to you. I know I have a bad way of unintelligible questions, but yeah, I think maybe with Greg Bishop, you guys were talking recently on, or probably years ago now, but when I listened to, and I think the idea of humans being instrumental in the act of Close Encounters, and I'm wondering kind of where you fall on that at this point after hashing over all these contactee stories for this book and also A to Adamski.
Yeah, that's what Greg calls the co-creation theory. And boy, I mean, I don't know for sure, but for a long time, that seemed to be the theory that made the most sense to me, at least for my own experience, which I had on LSD with a friend, where we saw a bunch of UFOs. And yeah, I've talked about this quite a bit over the years, but it seemed at the time it happened, it was kind of a symbiotic relationship. What we were interacting with was interacting with us in a sense to that we were both part of the experience, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not explaining this real well, but that the heightened state of awareness we were in, or the intoxicated state, or however you want to look at it, a lot of times experiencers down through the ages, whatever they might have been experiencing, UFOs or entities, would often before the experience, enter into a trance state in one way or another. It might be intoxicants, it might be gazing into a crystal ball or a candle or whatever to open themselves up to that experience. And this is what John Keel called the super spectrum. Basically, that psychics can become aware of, like tuning in a radio, or able to peek through some type of window that you're, perhaps something that's always there, but only in a certain state of minds are we able to see that and interact with the other, whatever the other may be. And it's a two-way experience. It feels like that whole trickster element that they're
right
as amused about us as we are, about them.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's a theory that makes sense to me, but I'm open to a lot of different theories. It's not just one. Witnessing UFOs is not just one thing. Obviously.
Sure.
Yeah. Lately, I feel like there's this kind of return to like I don't know what the word, not optimistic, but like a very credulous kind of like ufology, especially with like the To the Stars stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Why is that happening now? Because I feel like we went through sort of a moving toward the, I don't know, like the valet kind of like interdisciplinary approach. And now it's sort of like the main thrust of ufology feels like it's on this other path where like we're waiting for like the Pentagon to disclose something, which of course is, useless. But why do you think that's happening?
Well, I talk about there's nothing new in ufology, and of course there's been UFO disclosure from the very beginning, Donald Kehoe, and more recent years Stephen Bassett, and the latest the TTSA thing. I was kind of skeptical about that whole venture from the get-go. One of the reasons you have some of these recurring characters, Hal Puthoff involved, and the different people who worked in intelligence, and the whole it's kind of a rollout, that got attention from first like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and people were going, "Whoa, you got these big legacy media looking at this. Maybe this is it,"
Yeah.
And of course, as time passed, one thing I think that you got a lot of, say, credulous or a new breed of people, that group of people into this was, this is really the first time you had a lot of social media, internet groups really latch onto something. And so that was part of it. I think there was some manipulation going on there with, this is my theory. I talk about TTSA in a bit in the book, but I didn't get too deep into what they were involved with, or what I suspect they were involved with. With social media. There was like a couple fan websites showed up, as TTSA got rolling, and it became obvious that these were pretty well produced fan websites. They looked totally professional, and if you went to them, it looked like an advertisement for TTSA. So it seemed like there was some astroturfing going on, and with those websites, what I suspect is that TTSA was part of their social media influence campaign, but they were trying to distance themselves and show that other, fans were behind these groups. But, there was also some involvement in different Facebook groups where you have some of these guys that were connected to TTSA and earlier the aviary, like the Kit Greens of the world.
Yeah.
We're interacting with some of these Facebook groups, and you've seen there's like the Wilson documents and other things that came out of these groups that all seem to be ultimately promoting the TTSA mission. So that was kind of long-winded, but I think there was some astroturfing going on, and they were working the media, and there's still some interaction with the media going on. I think not so much the big the Times or the Washington Post, but recently it's been Fox News seems to have latched onto this.
There seems to be like the dialing up of the hostile ETs narrative that's been there for so long. And I also thought it was really interesting in the new book how it's kind of insinuating that maybe it's the DoD's bluff to say that they have recovered crafts and stuff. I thought that was really interesting and kind of a way that I had never really thought about it as to why these narratives would be pushed. Maybe because they don't know much at all. There's not any new insights on the phenomena.
Yeah, that's a thread that runs through the ATIP TTSA stuff too, about recovered craft, and that's been there since the beginning with the Roswell story. And it's something Tom DeLonge was talking about early on. There was some McCaslin guy who had debris, and it seems like they also were talking about the alloys or the whatever metamaterials they had, and all this seemed to point to, okay, they have material from alien crafts, but nothing ever came of all the promises about all this stuff. And a lot of it's some oddball thing, like one of the it appears that Linda Moulton Howe passed on some of Art's parts for she did more than pass on, according to what I've heard. Right. Sold them to DeLonge for $30,000. And, that's apparently they've been, these Art's parts, people have had these for a number of years. Even Bob Bigelow, though he's kind of sketchy about it. You can never pin him down. So, all of that was part of the big promise or the big reveal that was going to happen with the TTSA group, that, they had these metamaterials that would reveal maybe sort of that, they came from an ET craft. And of course saw the Tic Tac film footage they've been promoting for several years now that,
Right.
It hasn't gone any farther than that.
Yeah, it sure hasn't. I mean, yeah. It does feel like every few years there's a new, very sort of unimpressive thing that they rally around. And I mean, but of course there's still good research being done at the fringes, as always. But the mainstream stuff is kind of, it has this same pattern of, like a kind of a circus every once in a while.
Yeah, and it was a pretty, if you look at it from the perspective as a slick media rollout that was timed, to try to promote the launching of TTSA. I mean, these big newspaper articles came out around that time. Then every time like a year or so later, when they were getting ready to launch their television show Unidentified. Leading up to that, just a few weeks, you'd have different leaks coming out about, this Navy program looking at UFOs, and it was always time to seem to promote whatever that group was trying to sell or promote, whether it was the television show or the, selling stocks in their company.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
I mean, it seems to be they keep repeating the same basic story that, it's any time now that there's going to be reports coming out in Congress, and yes, we will have UFO disclosure.
Right. Is there, I mean, do you think there is a UFO subculture without intelligence manipulation? Like, I mean, obviously historically, no, but is it possible?
Well, I mean, it's, it's part of ufology is the intelligence agencies interacting with it, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, and it goes on. How much of it is, you're never sure about what the hell Richard Doty is. He just like to fuck with people's head, or is this part of an actual, still part of some counterintelligence program, or is he brought back every few years to, be part of a intelligence disinformation campaign, or is he just a rogue agent? Never really quite sure what the hell's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's true. Do you think stuff like obviously QAnon is the big thing for runaway conspiracy mythos? Do you think that's like sort of in the same tradition as like Dulce and stuff?
Yeah, I really do. A lot of it, I mean, it's come out, people have connected some of the Dulce stuff to like Pizzagate and QAnon. One of the things that they were, there was a bunch of people brought down into underground bases. That comes up in the Pizzagate QAnon stuff. That I forget what their spin on it was, but that seemed like it was straight out of Dulce. With the Dulce story, like I said, it was the aliens were basically creating these human alien hybrids because they were a dying race, and they were also extracting fluids from children and drinking them, which is like a Pizzagate thing,
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the old anti-Semitic thing too, conspiracies going way back about the Jews sacrificing babies and drinking their blood. So you can certainly make some connections there. Yeah.
Yeah. I do think. Yeah, it's always. It's funny that for a while they're like the other that was being, accused of these crimes was just like aliens, and now it's back to being to people again. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder what that means. Yeah. Anyway,
Coming out of like the zine culture, what do you think about the trajectories of like misinformation now, especially through like memes, something like QAnon that just sort of snowballed? It kind of seems like it's almost unwieldy to control. Like I imagine that intelligence is almost scared of their own creations now.
Well, it's definitely changed from the zine days, back then it was kind of definitely more underground, obscure, more cool.
yeah.
And a lot of the conspiracy theorists were 70s, 80s, more left oriented. But then, there's always been the left and the right conspiracy theories, and they call it fusion paranoia, where they meet in the middle. But yeah, in recent years, it's just gone crazy. And a lot of this is just more manipulation of conspiracy theories as political propaganda, and it's kind of resulted in a religious cult of sorts. So all the cool kid conspiracy theorists of the 90s or whatever have kind of evolved into what conspiracy theory is now, which is like it's become pretty toxic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess it's like maybe the last 6 or 7 years, I feel like, is when it hit that like really strange. I guess went mainstream is kind of a silly way to say it, but it kind of like became this like undeniable cultural force.
Yeah. Well, part of it was definitely sparked by the 2016 election. A lot of the, Russian hacking and stuff that went on there that kind of fed into the Pizzagate narrative. Not saying that the Russians, whoever created Pizzagate, but with, the whole, the memes were already there back in the 90s with Hillary Clinton, as there was these conspiracy theories that she was a child sacrificing pedophile back then, and those were regurgitating those was political capital here with the 2016 election, which fed a lot of those old the Clinton what they call it, the Clinton kill list, and all that fed into the a lot of the Pizzagate stuff. And you had, it's always been part of conspiracy theories I liked was just, opening up your head to some wild ideas like the James Shelby Downard stuff, where you start seeing patterns and codes and little clues and piecing them together, and that got really ramped up with all that the Pizzagate nonsense, where if you look hard enough for anything, you're gonna feed that confirmation bias and make your self believe it.
Right. It's kind of it goes back to the Robert Anton Wilson Chapel Perilous method of following the narrative, but not so you can't follow your way back out of the forest or whatever.
And, I have encountered these things over the years, synchronicities, when I've been working on different book projects and stuff. So the how that happens, I don't know for sure, but that effect is real. And the more you look for stuff, the deeper you go into the rabbit hole, the more things seem to fall in your path. Yeah. And it can, sometimes I wrote about that a bit in the book. It can really set you down that Chapel Perilous path, or make you think you're going crazy sometimes when all these kind of patterns seem to emerge.
Yeah.
that make your overarching theory make sense. But I've written about a lot about these guys like Kerry Thornley and Downard or whatever. They were Thornley, for instance, he really started seeing a lot of that as he got deeper into his JFK assassination conspiracies, where he began to believe that he was being harassed by a group of people that were following him around and talking in code. But then he also suffered from paranoid schizophrenia at some point. So, what came first?
Right.
Was he actually witness to some conspiracy that turned him into a paranoid schizophrenic?
Yeah. Yeah, Kerry Thornley stuff is really fascinating. And yeah, I watched, the new Adam Curtis stuff and noticed all that Thornley stuff, and lo and behold, there you were in the credits. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was from me. He, let's see. It's been a few years now. I want to say maybe 2017. He contacted me. And he was coming out to the West Coast, and he wanted to talk to me, interview me about Kerry Thornley and Greg Hill. He was interested in them. And I didn't know who he was at that time. I said, yeah, fine, come on out. And I had kind of heard of him. I'd heard about, hypernormalization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think before he showed up, I watched that and was blown away. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And so he came out and told, sat down and talked. He interviewed me about Thornley and Greg Hill and Robert Anton Wilson, and started discussing this concept for a documentary he had, and about how, a lot of the disillusionment that came out of the 60s, and Thornley and Hill and Wilson were all part of those guys that thought, yeah, we could not accept reality as it is, consensus reality, but create our own paths, like a lot of people did in the 60s. And ultimately they found, both Thornley and Greg Hill lost their path because they lost their way along. And so that was kind of the concept he was throwing around. Like I said, that was 2017, and I shared like the video footage you see of Thornley, and that I shared with him.
Yeah.
And he took some excerpts out of the book and was really interested in the whole Jim Garrison propinquity theory called time and propinquity. And that's kind of, once again, talking about these patterns and little signs that you piece together. If you saw a person here at a certain date at a place where some other person showed up at a later date, you start connecting them to this greater JFK assassination conspiracy. So all that stuff interested Adam Curtis. Then, we kind of stayed in touch over the last couple of years. And he said, yeah, I'm still working on the film here, but now it's turned into like a 6-part documentary. So
yeah,
and he finally finished it, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Can't get you out of my head.
Yeah.
So it's called. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you kind of in your years researching Thornley, have you wavered on any sort of consensus if you think he was maybe manipulated or not?
Oh man. Well, I know for sure that he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm. And
so that kind of clouds the issue if you got sucked into a conspiracy. There were some odd happenings around him, and even in later years, talking to people who knew him in little 5 Points, Atlanta, which is like the Bohemian area there. It was he was known as quite a character, this kind of old hippie guy with all these crazy stories. But I heard these from more than a couple people, that Thornley would be somewhere, then he'd leave, and afterwards some like Men in Black intelligence type people, or they looked like feds or whatever, were asking questions about him, and that was many years after the whole JFK assassination. So that there was some weirdness going on with him. I mean, he ultimately believed a lot of crazy sounding stuff, that he's part of a Nazi genetic breeding experiment. He and Oswald, were created to be would-be assassins. Who knows about some of that stuff? But who knows for sure? A lot of oddities concerning Thornley's life. In other words, I don't know for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very foggy path. But I think it's Discordianism itself. It's just so interesting that it started as this kind of like playful, almost like Fluxus in a way, and then it just had these like massive implications and almost seemed to attract like intelligence types and stuff for its utility.
Well, a lot of people more recently, Wilson said at one time, they thought Operation Mindfuck was a lot of fun, but then it got out of hand, playing all these pranks and doing these fake letters to like people in the John Birch Society, or screwing with Jim Garrison or whoever. But it kind of came back and bit them in the butt, when Thornley kind of went off the deep end. Wilson got fearful that Thornley might pop out of a bush at one point and start taking shots at him, because that was the period when Thornley went off the deep end. So it's another one of those Chapel Perilous things. But more recently, the whole, we were talking about a lot of the weirdness that came out of the 2016 campaign, the whole Pepe the Frog thing, and a lot of people who were involved in that scene, the alt-right people were pointing towards Operation Mindfuck and Discordianism as an influence, and using sigils and these type of things to create their own reality. I'm sure Wilson and Thornley and Greg Hill would have been horrified and wouldn't have signed on to the Pepe the Frog white nationalism stuff. But there you go.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you unleash things, they
right.
do the unexpected.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah. In studying these like long-standing topics like JFK and all your work on Manson, has there been anything that's came out since since you researched that stuff that's surprised you or kind of made you maybe want to take another look at that stuff, or are you just completely just over talking about that?
Well, I'm over the Manson stuff pretty much, but I would say that book the guy wrote called Chaos.
Yeah.
Familiar with that?
Yeah, I was wondering if you took a look at that.
Yeah, at first, I think it came out 2-3 years ago now, and I'd seen it in a bookstore. I kind of picked it up and looked at it, and within the book, it shows he had a couple pictures of himself at work at his desk, and I go, what's this? What is he making this all about him? So that my first reaction was that kind of turned me off. But then later I saw him interviewed on, might have been Joe Rogan or something. I go, well, I understand now why he was putting himself in the story, because it was a journey over many, many years, stumbling upon a lot of this intelligence agency stuff. And once again, he didn't find a smoking gun per se. I apologize, I forget the guy's name off the top of my head, but
Tom something, what's it?
Tom O'Neill.
O'Neill, yeah.
Tim,
yeah. And so he found some interesting leads, but like he said, he's one of those really hardcore reporters. It was like, I really want to get to the bottom of this. It's why it's taken me 20 years and I'm still not there. But he finally put out that book. And so, yeah, I thought that was fascinating. I thought he turned up some new, interesting leads and characters in that book that kind of takes, the stuff I was looking at in The Shadow over Santa Susanna a few steps further. So that, that was interesting.
Yeah, and that kind of started as just an article too, like your most recent book. He was just supposed to write like a retrospective for People, I think, or something.
Yeah, I got to admire the guy. Yeah, it was for some entertainment magazine. I forget what it was exactly, and they paid him up front for a story. Then, like a year later or 2 years later, well, I'm still working on it. And whoever editors he had was like, okay, we're behind you, man. I guess this went on for a few years, and he was still like, oh man, this story has changed. It's he just wanted some puff type piece, but I've come across all these other leads, and I gotta follow them where they may go.
Yeah.
So yeah, I respect somebody who takes that approach, just taking their time. That was kind of how the Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks evolved over the years, because it really started with we're talking about Tal Levesque. I began interacting with him in like 2008. I was writing an article called "My Breakfast with Tal." That was the major plan, not because he was such a fascinating character, and that's one of the chapters in the book. Yeah. And then I began to understand and figure out what a large role he played in the Dulce Base mythos, and that got me into looking at all the different Dulce Base stories. And that was going to be an article called Deconstructing Dulce, where I went through all of that and kind of broke them down to see where this stuff came from. Then I saw, as I mentioned before, all these other connections with Bill Moore, Roswell Doty, Area 51,
right?
Serpo, which 10 years later, I finally finished the book. It's like something I'd set aside for a couple of years working on other stuff, but always came back to it and finally finished it.
Yeah. And then at the end, you have that appendix, that email from Tal, which is really an incredible little document. What do you make of that? What do you think's have you talked to him since, or is that it?
He died in 2018.
Oh, so no. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that might have been the last email I got from him, last time I interacted with him. And I knew all along that he had played a large role in, that was my suspicion from what I pieced together, that most likely the Thomas Costello character, was kind of a composite of Tal himself, who claims he had knowledge of underground bases and worked as a security guard. Also a composite of Paul Benowitz. And, for many years, Tal kept telling me, no, Tom Costello was a real guy and this and that. And I kept prodding him over time. And I think I ultimately broke him in that letter that appears at the end of the book.
Yeah.
Where he admitted to concocting large pieces of the Dulce Base mythos.
Yeah. To what end, do you think?
Well, he kind of says it in that letter, as I recall. He wanted to take certain aspects of ufology and make them more entertaining, and bring in these legends of, Tal had known Richard Shaver back in the day.
Yeah.
And he'd long had this interest in the Hollow Earth and creatures that lived under that. And that all kind of worked its way into the Dulce Base story. And just to make the field, in his mind, more interesting. You could argue that, yeah, a lot of this, what he was involved with, later came out, and some of the stuff he saw, in that entered into popular culture and the X-Files, and some of that stuff.
Yeah, kind of maybe ended up being a bit of like a feedback loop or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
And he always considered himself a man behind the scenes. He didn't like to be interviewed, but he interacted, was a huge influence on all these a network of different writers that he was feeding information to, who were also writing about Dulce. So it was like this big confirmation loop that helped spread, that story. And he was also friends with Dan Aykroyd, and helped work on different projects with Dan Aykroyd. The whole reason he moved near me to a town called Mariposa was he came out here. This was back in the early 2000s or so. They're kind of expecting, if we ever had the cataclysm, there'd be an island here in California, and Mariposa would be one of the places that would survive that. And so Tal, at least according to Tal, was coming out and exploring Mariposa, and Aykroyd had plans. If I can ever talk to Dan Aykroyd, I want to ask him to confirm some of this stuff.
Yeah.
He was planning to set up a hard rock cafe, restaurant, music scene there, and turn Mariposa into the Sedona of California.
Huh.
Anyway, that's how Tal ended up out here in my neck of the woods in California.
Wild.
And he was, while he was, like I said, he passed away a couple of years, but he was, if you see, there's some maps you'll see on the internet, and one place I can direct you, go to my Chasing UFOs blog, and I have a Saucers, Kooks, and Spooks resource page, and there's links, and there's like a Talavesque resource page, and it will show a bunch of these maps he constructed of all these underground bases and how they're connected, and he believed this whole area out here too was all part of this underground network that had been, back in ancient times, there had been these entities living under there, but more recently, these were all connected as part of secret government programs.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I love going back through all this stuff, because it's kind of like stuff I got in bits and pieces throughout my, time as a UFO internet kind of reader. And it's just, it's very, you take obviously a pretty skeptical approach to it, or at least neutral, but, and which I think you need at this point is important, because so much of this stuff is, I think it's at the point where it's ready to be taken apart. But it's just, it's kind of, it's a real joy, like going back and like thinking, like having these hazy memories of like, oh man, like, I remember this whole case.
Yeah, underground base.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of this stuff I came across in, going back the early days of the internet, bulletin boards and news groups, I knew bits and pieces of this story. I heard about, Dulce and the Krill papers, and, all these things were like a haze that kind of all morphed together. And so, it was kind of this book was a learning experience to go back and look into a lot of that stuff and see where it really came from, and all the characters that were involved. Not only the Talavesque and his network of people, but Bill Cooper, John Lear, they all promoted a lot of these stories. They all overlapped and were different variations or spins on,
Right.
some of the same stories. Everybody didn't, all these different folks, Cooper or whatever, they'd embellish them with their own little unique spins.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cooper is wild. He's the way that he's retained his popularity is astounding.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really. I mean, I've read Behold a Pale Horse, and it's kind of just like I don't. It's not. I mean, it's not all that impressive. But I guess
it's conglomeration of this stuff thrown together. But he was. Right. It was the right time for him, I guess. To make it. Yeah. And it's funny. He still has a big following. He has. Part of that was Anthony Hilder, who was another one of these guys, worked with Cooper, and I think somehow Cooper has a big black following in prisons that's part of his. Even rappers, there's songs about Bill Cooper, so I'm not sure how that happened. Some way that Cooper, or I think Hilder, was involved. They got a lot of his Behold the Pale Horse book into prisons and stuff, and he got a following with a lot of inmates, and black inmates in particular. That kind of worked itself into some rap songs and stuff too over the years. So
yeah, it's that like visceral Illuminati narrative that I think is so effective. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And of course, he was kind of a prototype for Alex Jones.
Right.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. I read not the whole thing, but a bit of the biography, Pale Horse Rider, and
yeah, it's good.
Yeah, and that definitely gets into that. I kind of had forgotten about that. Yeah, he has that prison kind of following.
It's crazy.
It's really, really interesting.
I mean, some people would peg, Cooper was part of the malicious scene, so they, maybe a lot of people see him as a white supremacist, maybe to some degree, but then, he's, has this black following.
Right. Yeah, he's kind of, he is that proto Alex Jones, but he's kind of also got an enigma quality to him as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's also like the apocalyptic imagery has that crossover with like a lot of Christian radio stuff too. It's in that cadence.
And another guy that had one of those violent deaths that seems to keep popping up in these in this scene, just like either suicides or in his case, I guess, a shootout.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is up with that? Just is that like one of the risks you take on in entering this?
Well, he went off the deep end, it seems, and part of it was he basically said, screw the IRS, and it was got indicted on tax evasion and bank fraud, and he saw the U.S. government and Bill Clinton as his enemy, and he was, just became more paranoid, even of people in the town where he lived in Eager, Arizona, and was threatening locals and whatnot, and had these federal warrants out, and I wrote about a little bit in the book. And because of these complaints, from locals of Bill Cooper, like he had locals that would come out and party or hang out on a parcel of land near Cooper's place, and he was paranoid about that, and he'd chase them off with firearms. So eventually that led to that showdown with the cops, and he got blown away, but he also shot a cop in the head. Who survived the shooting, but he was fucked up for the rest of his life.
That's really because I kind of I forget that that's what happened with him because he's such
It's an insane story. Yeah.
And you can listen to some of the old shows. He liked to take a nip of hooch now and then, and
yeah.
he was known. He was also, according to Tal had a lot of people he was feeding information to that he used for proxies in a sense. And so Cooper was one of those guys, and he hung out with Cooper. Cooper was in LA before he moved out to Arizona, and they do these interviews on the Billy Goodman happening, and Cooper would go through, a fifth of whiskey, doing these interviews about aliens and stuff. And one time he said he had some type of bird or canary that Cooper pulled out of a cage and killed him right in front of them. So he was a strange dude who would get, violent after drinking, and you mix that with firearms and paranoia. Well,
right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's crazy. What else?
At least, some people would argue, obviously, that that wasn't necessarily the case with Cooper, but certainly he did like firearms, and he did like his hooch.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Oh yeah. So you had a sort of a role in that movie, The Hill and the Hole, was something.
Mm-hmm.
I watched that. I don't know, maybe a few months ago, and I really thought that was a pretty great adaptation of that story. What was your role in that? Besides, was it just kind of like an acting role, or did you have some role in developing that? Or
yeah, I helped with, I guess, as far as development. The guys who produced the film, Bill Darman and Chris Ernst. Bill had a series which you can find, kind of like a paranormal roadshow thing he was doing called Mandate 33. Mm-hmm. And he interviewed me a few years ago for that. So we started became friends. And so he approached me whenever that was, a few years ago now. Hey, we're going to film a movie. Wondering if you wanted to be in it. And I go, okay, sure. Why not? And then I said, you do know I've never acted before. I had no idea what exactly they had in mind. And so they presented me with the script, and I have a featured role in it. I guess my involvement as far as creatively was with a lot of the dialogue. I helped really kind of flesh that out for the character. Because as I started going through, the script, it was... it was a learning experience for me too. Like I said, I'd never done any acting, so I just start reading through this script, and it was like, well, that, a certain word or a phrase didn't feel right coming out of my mouth, Yeah. So I talked to them and say, hey, can I try some other dialogue? And say, yeah, whatever you want to try, go for it. And so, that led me to probably crafting about half of the dialogue in the film for my character. And so, that was my creative part in it.
Yeah, I thought it was really great. It kind of touches on a lot of that kind of the high strangeness, high weirdness kind of area. But it has that pulpy Fritz Lieber kind of thing as well. Yeah. I think I've recommended it on here before, but I think our listeners should check that out. I think it's on Amazon Prime.
Well, I was really happy how it came out. I mean, you don't know when you're actually in the process of making the film how what it's going to look like. Am I going to look like a fool, or and the end result came out really good, I thought. And I was involved in the process as they were editing earlier versions, and eventually it all really came together and was really tight. And I thought it came out well.
Yeah. So what do you think, Dave, or do we have any other questions?
Yeah, maybe we could finish up. I was just wondering if there was maybe like in researching from A to Adamski, there was like a contactee story that maybe in researching really you endeared yourself to, because I learned about Paulina Peavy from you talking about it, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, these paintings are incredible. Just wondering if there were any that stuck out.
Well, that Paulina Peavy was Greg Bishop actually ended up writing that one. He really got blown away by her, and her artwork is really magnificent. In fact, I was contacted recently during COVID time. There was going to be a exhibit for stuff in LA I was going to go check out, but that didn't happen. So that was a cool discovery, and Greg dealt more with her. God, let me think. There was a lot of stuff in that book. I'd have to pull it out and flip through it. I can't.
It says, all right, it's putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we could wrap it up.
I like some of the more humorous ones, like Andy Sinatra, who was this what they call him, the psychic barber or something that channeled aliens. He was just a humorous character that showed up oftentimes on the Long John Nebel show, and they're all near and dear to my heart. Contactees, like my children. I can't pick out one.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Cool. So I guess maybe we can wrap it up there. So if people want to find you online, where might they find you?
Well, I have a website, which I haven't really done with much recently, adamgorightly.com, but I'm on Twitter. Mm-hmm. There is an author page on Facebook. I don't do a lot there. I'm more active on Twitter. You can find my books on Amazon. Oh, yeah, there's... Then for the Discordian stuff, there's a website called Historia Discordia, which there's a lot on that, actually. Yeah. a lot of material over the years that didn't make it into books. I was the recipient of the Discordian archives, which were the files and archives of Greg Hill, the founder of Discordianism, with Kerry Thornley. So a lot of that different material that came out of those archives I share on that Historia Discordia website. And there's Untamed Dimensions blog, which I haven't done much there recently, and also Chasing UFO blogs, which I started a couple of years ago to promote A is for Adamski and different UFO stuff I was working on. And if you go there, I recently just put up, I mentioned this earlier, that Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks resource page, where you can go and see some of the source materials for the book. So, yeah, that's my online presence, all those different websites and whatnot.
Awesome. Yeah. New book, highly recommended, Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks. And yeah, so thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Check out the back catalog.
Happy National Puppy Day.
Yeah, I didn't know, but
yeah, it is. According to Twitter, Twitter doesn't lie.
Right. Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening, and yeah. See you next time.
See you next.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Hey, thanks again.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Yeah.